I could do movies that were successful, that made a lot of money, but that I couldn't be acknowledged. And I bought in, and I believed that.
Hollywood glitters like a chandelier hung over a cliff, every crystal catching light, while the drop beneath stays silent, dark, and bottomless. Few stars have refracted more light and stared longer into that abyss than Demi Moore. She was the immaculate silhouette in a white shirt in Ghost, the embodiment of courtroom steel in A Few Good Men, the dangerously alluring promise in Indecent Proposal. For a time, she was the most bankable actress on earth, a face on every magazine rack, a name that sold stories before a single frame rolled. Yet the same town that crowned her also circled, whispered, measured her body and box office with a scale that never stayed still. Behind the premieres and pap flashes lived a childhood like broken glass, marriages cracked under the pressure of fame, and a private war with addiction and shame. Now at 62, she speaks of age as a wonderful gift, and the world watches as she steps back into the spotlight with a role of sinew and fury in the substance. But gifts often arrive wrapped in scars. The question, as the curtain rises again, is not only how she found her way back, but what the climb cost. In a town that exalts youth and discards the women who built its myths, how did Demi survive the free fall, and what did she learn in the dark that the light could never teach? Early life, childhood. She was born Demetria Jean Gynes, a name like a long breath, in the American West where promises feel wide and the sky often lies. Her biological father drifted out of the story before she learned its grammar. A stepfather stepped in, bringing his own storms. The family moved as if home were a rumor, drifting from place to place while money and stability remained specters at the edge of every night. In those small rooms and borrowed kitchens, the air grew heavy with adult problems. Arguments that curdled into silence, silences that fermented into fear. Childhood, for Demi, did not feel like a beginning. It felt like a test. There was a medical shadow, too, an eye condition that turned schoolyard stares into needles and mirrors into verdicts. Surgery would come, but not before the teasing etched itself into memory. To become visible in a way that did not hurt, she learned early to perform, to arrange her face, her voice, her posture, so the world saw only the angle she offered. The budding actress was not born in a studio, but in a living room where the floor was soft with uncertainty, where a child's instincts taught her to read a room faster than any script. Her mother, Virginia, was a woman of beauty and volatility, a sparkler in a bottle that would not always catch, but sometimes exploded without warning. Demi loved her mother fiercely, and that love complicated everything. The line between caretaking and childhood blurred, loyalty and survival braided together. A parent who is wounded makes the child both a witness and a nurse, and Demi learned to bind wounds that had no simple bandage. When the past was too loud, she disappeared into imagination, into faces she could try on, into lives she could borrow. Acting, at first, was not a career path but a shelter. The moves continued, the schools changed, and the sense of self had to be rebuilt as often as the bedroom. If there was a constant, it was longing. For safety, for acceptance, for a room where voices did not rise like storms. She discovered modeling almost by accident, the way a person discovers that a window they have always leaned against actually opens. The lens did not judge, it framed. It said, "Stand here, look there, become this." Every click was a tiny spell against the chaos, but the chaos had its own rhythm. Addiction threaded through the household, lighting holidays with sparks that sometimes turned to fires. A child's bargain formed. If I can succeed, if I can be perfect, if I can make enough noise in the world, maybe the noises at home will be quiet. That is the first tragic arithmetic of fame, the belief that public applause can balance private grief. Even in these earliest chapters, the seeds of a future story were planted. The fierce ambition, the aching need to be chosen, the suspicion that love is something you must earn in front of an audience. By the time adolescence arrived like a fast train, Demi had already learned the adult trick of compartmentalization. She could laugh while the floor tilted. She could pose while the heart trembled. Surrounded by so many shifting truths, she clung to one of her own. She would not be merely looked at. She would make people look. The distance between the girl who endured and the woman who commanded a screen was not so far. It was a single decision repeated again and again to step toward the light, no matter how unreliable it seemed. Early career. Los Angeles is a city built on auditions and waiting rooms, on names called and names forgotten. Demi arrived carrying hunger like a talisman, armed with the resilience forged in living rooms where she had been both diplomat and survivor. She took the work that came: commercial auditions, bit parts, the elastic hustle of a young woman trying to get a foot in a door that never stopped closing. Early rejections sting in a particular way. You are told you are too much or not enough, too distinctive or not memorable, a contradiction you are somehow supposed to solve by next Tuesday. She found pieces of herself on television sets where the coffee ran thin and the scripts changed at the last minute. A soap opera beckoned General Hospital, and with it the first real sense of a camera learning her face. Daytime television, relentless and unglamorous, is the gym where actors build muscles they do not know they will need. Lines must be learned quickly. Emotions must be summoned on demand. She was good at both, not because she had mastered technique, but because she had been practicing survival all her life. Consistency was a relief. A paycheck was a miracle. She studied the people who lasted, how they moved through a set, how they treated the crew, how they navigated rooms full of people who could change a life with a shrug. In these early days, she discovered something crucial. Control was rare, but preparation felt like power. She trained her voice, sharpened her instincts, and learned to choose moments like a thief selects doors. Casting directors began to remember her, not just for the cheekbones that photographers loved, but for the coiled energy that suggested the story inside her had teeth. The first film roles crept in supporting parts in projects where her name appeared modestly in the credits, but her presence lingered after the lights came up. She became associated with a circle the media would later nickname, a club of young actors whose names were written on the decade like ink on a napkin. The so-called Brat Pack. Labels are convenient. They sell magazines, but they also flatten what is complicated. Demi did not fit neatly into any ensemble because ensembles are safest when everyone plays a type, and she refused to be reduced to one. There were missteps, of course, projects that did not cohere, characters written thinner than their wardrobes, choices made from necessity rather than vision. Broke and hopeful sit parallel to glamorous and destined in this town. The freeway between them runs in both directions. Yet those years etched a signature in audience memory. The way she held a stare, a heartbeat longer than comfort allowed. The way vulnerability flickered in the eyes even when the mouth said something sharp. Directors notice such things. They do not always know what to do with them, but they remember. Gradually, the rooms changed. The waiting rooms gave way to meetings, the meetings to offers. She was beginning to ascend the narrow staircases, ethalids from working actress to someone studio's chase. And on one of the landings, waiting like fate, was a script about love, loss, and a ghost who refuses to let go. Career breakthrough. Ghost did not arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived like a melody people did not know they had been humming already. A love story braided with grief, a supernatural premise anchored in a human ache. For Demi, it offered a role that required both ferocity and fragility. Eyes that could carry a conversation with absence. She played a woman mourning a partner whose presence lingered in the air like perfume, and somehow, our audiences around the world felt seen in their own private losses. It was the paradox at the center of her gift. When she looked shattered, people felt held. The success was tectonic. Suddenly, Demi Moore was not a rising actress. She was Demi Moore. The name itself acquired a gravitational pull. Red carpets turned into battlegrounds of flashbulbs. Journalists parsed haircuts as if they were policy decisions. She went from waiting for permission to lead to being the reason movies were greenlit. Studio meetings began not with whether a film should be made, but whether she would carry it. With that power came a different kind of precariousness. The invisible clock Hollywood sets for women, the one that ticks louder with each birthday and box office report. Then came A Few Good Men, a crisp courtroom thunderhead where her intelligence felt like a blade honed on injustice. She held her own opposite men whose names were carved into the business like initials in wet cement, and she did it without theatrics, just an unwavering line of moral force that refused to bend. The role signaled something fundamental. She could be the emotional core and the ethical spine in the same breath. Indecent Proposal followed, a cultural grenade disguised as a glossy melodrama. The premise, marriage for sale for one night, the price tag printed like sin, required an actress who could carry moral ambiguity without losing the audience's empathy. Demi found the needle's eye and threaded it. She played desire and dread like two hands on a piano. People argued about the film, and while they argued, they saw it by the millions. Controversy sells tickets, but it also stamps a face into memory. In the span of a few years, she became what few achieve, an emblem. Short hair could become a headline. A role could become a referendum on what women were allowed to want. Her allure was never only about beauty, it was about self-possession, a gaze that met the camera and seemed to say, "I will not apologize for taking up space." In an industry that still often prefers its women apologetic, the stance was radical. It also made her a target. Behind the victories, the old shadows did not evaporate. Success does not neutralize the past. It amplifies it. The habits learned in chaotic rooms control everything you can. Brace for the next blow met the superstructure of a career that demanded control while offering very little. Every profile wanted a confession. Every photograph wanted proof of perfection. On set, she fought to imbue characters with sinew rather than sheen. Off-set, she fought the private skirmishes that fame both disguises and worsens. There were whispers of rivalries, the ordinary frictions of a profession that rewards scarcity. If one woman ascends, where, exactly, should the others stand? Meanwhile, the calculus of box office began to fixate on her numbers the way an anxious parent watches a fever chart. It was the era when star salaries were press releases, and for a woman to command record pay was, to some, an invitation to watch for failure. To be the highest paid is both a crown and a cross. Expectations inflate until applause starts measuring not the art but the receipts, and receipts are fickle gods. Peak years and public image. The 1990s did not just elevate Demi Moore, they crystallized her into a symbol. In an era when Hollywood measured success by the faces that could sell out a weekend, Demi's presence alone could pull millions to the theater. She was not simply an actress. She became a brand, a shorthand for ambition, desire, and controversy. Magazine editors competed for her image, photographers chased her silhouette, and late-night hosts rehearsed jokes about her salary as if wealth in a woman were a punchline. Her face appeared on the cover of Vanity Fair in a photograph that would detonate across culture. Pregnant, nude, unapologetic. That single image rewrote the rules of visibility, forcing conversations about motherhood, female power, and control over one's body into the mainstream. It was both lauded as revolutionary and mocked as self-indulgent, a perfect metaphor for her entire career, every move, a revelation to some and an outrage to others. The contradictions only multiplied. She was hailed as a trailblazer for negotiating unprecedented salaries, yet vilified for the same reason. Male actors had commanded astronomical paychecks for decades without reproach. But when Demi became the highest-paid actress in the world, the industry seemed to wait for her to stumble. Her success was treated less as an achievement and more as a challenge to be dismantled. On screen, she courted extremes. In G.I. Jane, she shaved her head, trained like a soldier, and transformed her body into a weapon. The public marveled, then recoiled, unsure of how to process a woman who refused to cloak strength in softness. In Striptease, she embodied raw sexuality, and though she committed fully, the film's failure became less about script or direction and more about her personally. The judgment was swift, merciless, and often dripping with misogyny. Where male stars could fail forward, Demi was portrayed as greedy, overreaching, and punished for daring to embody both vulnerability and command. Still, the cultural impact was undeniable. Women across the country copied her cropped hairstyles, her gym-honed physique, her daring red carpet choices. She became a weather vane for femininity in flux, proof that a woman could be tough without apology, maternal without invisibility, glamorous without surrender. Yet beneath the surface, the cost mounted. Endless travel pulled her from home. Paparazzi stalked her daughters. The pressure to be simultaneously youthful, maternal, and indomitable became unbearable. What many forget is that Demi was quietly reshaping Hollywood's business architecture during these years. Through her production company, she fought to secure creative control, to bring women's stories into spaces that had long resisted them. It was not the kind of legacy that produced glossy magazine spreads, but it left fingerprints on the contracts and opportunities of those who followed. She proved that an actress could be both the face of a film and the force behind it. And yet, even in triumph, shadows lingered. The same magazines that once crowned her began whispering about her age, dissecting her appearance with clinical cruelty. The tabloids grew louder, eager to drag private pain into public spectacle. Every victory carried the scent of a countdown, as if Hollywood itself was waiting for the moment her reign would falter. At her peak, Demi Moore embodied both the possibilities and the punishments reserved for women in Hollywood. She was adored and attacked in equal measure, celebrated as a pioneer while being cast as a cautionary tale. That duality, glory and crucifixion, became her defining image in the 1990s, a woman holding the world in her hands, even as the world sharpened its knives. Downfall. Struggles. Downfalls in Hollywood rarely arrive as thunderclaps. They creep like cracks in a mirror, hairline fractures that spread until the reflection shatters. For Demi Moore, the first fissures came in the form of box office disappointments. Striptease, billed as daring, became a lightning rod for ridicule. G.I. Jane, where she had transformed herself into a soldier of raw power, tested boundaries audiences were not prepared to accept. Rather than admiring her courage, critics sharpened their pens. She was too cold, too masculine, too ambitious. Success that once crowned her now morphed into evidence for the prosecution. Hollywood is rarely kind to women who dare to redefine themselves, and it is merciless to those who fail while doing so. Male contemporaries could stumble and rebound. Their failures were forgiven as experiments. But for Demi, each misstep became a referendum on her very right to lead films. Studio executives began to whisper in corridors. Was she worth the risk? Could she still open a movie? Her name, once synonymous with guaranteed profit, has now become a question mark stamped on every green light form. And then came the tabloids, vultures, circling, not merely over a career dip, but over a human life unraveling. They feasted on rumors of fractured marriages, photographed her walking with tired eyes, and speculated about her body with cruelty disguised as journalism. Her relationship with Ashton Kutcher, once celebrated, then mocked, provided endless fodder. What should have been private heartbreaks turned into public carnivals, headlines crafted to sell humiliation to the masses. The girl who once controlled every room she entered now found herself cornered in rooms where control was impossible. Hospital wards, tense custody conversations, negotiations where her smile felt like armor she no longer had the strength to hold. There were genuine descents into darkness. Health faltered. Nights blurred into mornings under the shadow of substances that promised silence but delivered collapse. Her body, punished by decades of impossible expectations, workouts, diets, surgeries, sleepless shoots, finally demanded a reckoning. She sought treatment, and treatment helped, until it didn't. Recovery, she learned, is not a straight road but a spiral staircase. She would climb, stumble, descend, then climb again, always haunted by echoes from the steps below. And as her inner world crumbled, so too did the outer scaffolding of her career. The phone rang less. Projects evaporated in meetings that ended with vague platitudes. Studios that once built campaigns around her face now looked away. There is no official declaration of exile in Hollywood, no letter announcing you are no longer welcome. There is only silence. Silence on the phone, silence in the trade magazines. silence that grows until you wonder if your name has been erased from the script of the town itself. Yet in that silence, Demi discovered a different kind of voice, her own. Applause had always been a thunder that drowned out everything else, but stripped of it, she heard the truth she had long avoided. She began to write. Her memoir, Inside Out, stripped away the gloss, tore down the stage set, and revealed the wreckage. The volatile mother, the early traumas, the addictions, the fractured marriages, the near-fatal relapses. What the magazines had airbrushed, she carved in ink. The book did not redeem. Her redemption is too simple a word. She redeemed herself by daring to tell the truth. And that truth, raw and uneven, became a kind of mercy. Readers did not see a fallen star. They saw themselves, imperfect, scarred, still standing. They saw the little girl in the glamorous woman and the weary woman in the little girl. For the first time, Demi owned her story rather than being owned by it. Hollywood, faced with that unvarnished account, had to look again. No longer could her worth be measured in opening weekends or glossy profile. Endurance itself became her stardom, the fact that she had fallen so far, endured so much, and still refused to vanish. In a town obsessed with beginnings and endings, Demi Moore became something rarer. Proof that survival is not the absence of failure but the art of rising after it. Personal life and hidden pain. Love, for Demi, was never a subplot. It was a central arc with multiple acts, marriages that began with fireworks and ended with ash. Partnerships lived under a dome of flashbulbs where even ordinary disagreements became national gossip. With Bruce Willis, she built a family, 3 daughters whose names reoriented her sense of purpose. Motherhood grounded her, even as careers on separate coasts and separate sets pulled at the seams. The dissolution of that marriage broke more than a contract. It fractured a dream of an ordinary home she had never been given. Then came a love story that the culture could not resist turning into a spectacle. An age-gap romance with a younger star, a pairing that seemed to threaten America's quiet rules about who is allowed to be older and still adored. The judgment was swift, sometimes cruel, dripping with a double standard that men rarely face when time narrows its lens. She endured the jokes and the speculation. When that relationship failed, the schadenfreude was loud. Loss is hard enough without a chorus. Inside these public storms, her private weather was severe. Old coping mechanisms knocked at the door. She opened it sometimes. She shut the door for others. There were estrangements and reconciliations, particularly with the woman who had introduced so much disorder into her early life. Grief for a mother is rarely clean. Love insists, even when memory protests. As her daughters grew, she learned to apologize in the language of action, to show up, to be still, to let the next generation watch her choose health, even on days when the choice felt like lifting a stone. In interviews, she began to speak about shame the way a diver talks about depth, not as an abstract, but as pressure that can crush if you ascend too quickly without learning how to breathe. She learned to breathe, therapy, spiritual practices, and practical routines tuned like instruments. She discovered that boundaries are not walls but bridges you patrol with care. The glamour outside could no longer eclipse the architecture inside. She rebuilt, room by room, knowing that the house might be photographed again but would never belong to anyone else. Later years, legacy. Time moved, as it does, whether the industry was looking or not. And then a director with a ferocious imagination wrote a role that required a woman who knew how to alchemize pain into voltage. The substance handed her a character of muscle and myth, a body horror parable about the cost of chasing an ideal that devours you. It was, in a way, the mirror she had been walking toward for years, a story about age, vanity, and the violence of the gaze, told by an actress who had endured that violence and lived to name it. On red carpets, she began to say something that startled a town addicted to backward glances, that growing older is a gift, a clarity you cannot counterfeit with creams or camera tricks. She did not pretend time had not taken things. She insisted instead that time had given other things back. Authority, humor, the right to choose work that matters more than it flatters. Audiences, fatigued by an industry that tries to freeze women in amber, leaned in. Here was a star from their youth refusing to reenact her youth, delivering instead a performance that felt like a verdict rendered on an entire system. Her legacy now stretches beyond the box office graphs of the 1990s. It includes a blueprint for surviving Hollywood's most predictable betrayal, the one it reserves for women who dare to exist in full view past a certain birthday. She taught a generation that you can vanish and return, that relevance is not a trophy but a practice, that truth told in your own voice can unmake a decade of headlines. She became, paradoxically, an emblem of perseverance in a business that often prefers early endings. From the girl with the wandering childhood to the woman claiming her age as power, the arc is not tidy, it is not meant to be, it is human, and that is why it resonates now, perhaps more than it did when her face was on every billboard. The older Demi Moore gets, the more precise her art becomes, less decoration, more incision. In that maturation is a lesson Hollywood keeps trying to ignore, that a woman's value is not a countdown but an unfolding. Hollywood loves to tell you that youth is currency and beauty is a contract with a tiny font. Demi Moore has read the contract, lived through its penalties, and returned with annotations written in fire. She rose, she fell again, and then she chose not to disappear. At 62, she stands in the light not as a souvenir of the 1990s, but as an artist who has made a truce with time and turned that truce into weaponry. Did Hollywood betray hair? Perhaps. But the deeper question is whether the betrayal taught her something the golden years could not. That survival is an art form, that reinvention is not a trick but a truth, and that the greatest role a star can play is herself, unapologetic, unrepeatable, unafraid. What memory of Demi Moore stays with you most? The sculpted resolve, the mournful eyes in Ghost, the relentless drive of a soldier, or the hearty-won clarity of a woman who calls age a gift? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories behind Hollywood's curtain, where the light is dazzling, the shadows are long, and the truth, at last, refuses to be silent.